Hey, so I'm trying to something a little different. Instead of playing the same music over and over again, I'm gonna talk through what I'm doing. Uh, Let me know if you like it better than listening to my music. So what I'm doing here is adding detail to the engine of the F-302 model that I started a while back. Um, and it's really a lot of simple kind of simple operations and simple geometry added together to look complex. And I am following a reference here. I'm trying to make it as accurate to the F-302 in the show as possible, but I do make some artistic decisions that don't completely match uh, how the show used F-302 looks. Um, so here I'm using the knife tool to cut out the wheel wells of the F-302. And this is like the work I'm doing here, I'm going to end up uh, deleting later on. So I'm doing a lot of work that I'm not going to use later on. And you'll see that when it comes to it. um, yeah, modifiers are your friends here. So I just used an array modifier to build those panels for the intake of the jet engines. Um, and I'm doing a lot of probably unnecessary work of trying to get the geometry to line up such that all the faces are planar with themselves. So I'll add planes in that I know all four vertices are in the same plane, and then I'm trying to align the actual geometry that I'm building with those planes that I'm adding. So it's probably a lot of unnecessary work because I'm going to end up adding a subsurf modifier to the wings, particularly, and then it doesn't really matter that all your planes are aligned perfectly because the subsurf kind of smooths everything out, and it'll end up looking fine anyway. Um, but I think initially I was planning on not adding a subsurf modifier to the wings. I was planning it on having the wings be more or less solid geometry of just a few planes intersecting. But I'll change my mind on that later. And here you can see I'm fiddling with the wheel well you saw earlier. Um, and that was whenever you cut a hole in an object and then add a subsurf later, you run into some shading artifacts and some geometry artifacts. It doesn't look super great. So what I'm eventually going to decide to do is use a get rid of that hole I cut. Just have the wings be a solid piece and add a subsurf modifier, then build a Boolean object that I'm going to cut out the wheel well with, and add a Boolean modifier onto the wings as well. And that ends up looking a lot better, and it's saves time. Ultimately, here doesn't save time, but if I would have started out doing it that way, it would have saved me time. So it is what it is. So when you're cutting a hole out of an object and you want to add subsurf onto that object, you either have to add holding edges or you have to use edge sharpness, because you usually you don't want the whole object to be smooth. Usually there's some smooth and some kind of sharp edges mixed together. And to get those sharp edges, you need either holding edges or um, uh, edge sharpness to get that to work. And here I'm trying to, when you add holding edges, that adds a lot of extra geometry, and I'm trying to get the geometry to work without adding a lot of unnecessary loop cuts. Which, like I said, eventually I'm just going to give up on that and use a Boolean object, which is going to end up looking a little better, and it's going to be easier to do also. But, you know, I can't do that without going through a whole lot of unnecessary work first, right? So it's okay to make mistakes. And you saw really quickly there when I was looking at it with these cuts that it didn't look great where the wheel well was cut out of the wing. It looked kind of wonky. And I'm trying to fix that here. And eventually I'm just going to give up on fixing that. You'll see it when it happens. So yeah, fiddling with the faces, trying to get the shading to look right, trying to get the trying to not add a whole bunch of unnecessary geometry. And here you see there, I just decided to do it with a Boolean, so I built an object that I'm going to cut out of the wing there, and then I'm going to remove a whole bunch of those unnecessary loop cuts. There we go. Getting rid of unnecessary geometry. Yeah, so it simplifies the object, and then I add a bevel and then a subsurf. So the bevel catches those sharp edges and adds actual extra geometry, and then the subsurf smooths it out while still keeping the sharp edges that were created by the bevel. And here I'm building the object that's going to cut out the wheel wells. And I'm going to apply the same logic to the flaperons, which are flaps and ailerons together. So in an aircraft, traditionally you'll have separate ailerons and flaps, but with the F-302, and I think like the F-16 does the same thing, instead of having separate control surfaces for flaps and ailerons, it uses the same. It uses the flaps as ailerons and just changes the way it deflects things. Sort of tangential to building a 3D model.